Okay, let's get going. Thank you all for joining. There's a pretty good turnout, and I can recognize both a number of corporates and banks here in the crowd. So thank you so much for joining, and everyone else who's not in a corporate or in a bank. And also welcome to you, Claus Nielsen from CXFacts.
Thank you.
Very nice to have you on board.
Nice being here.
I'm just perfect. Just going through a few practicalities before getting to the agenda and the kickoff. The session is being recorded. So anyone who hasn't been able to attend today will be able to watch this later on, and as usual, it'll be on our website, so you can rewatch it there. Also, for those of you then later on watching this in recording, if you have any questions, you can just email the team. But obviously, those of you who are here today, just use the Q&A. The chat has been disabled, but the Q&A is open. So just post any kind of questions along the way or at the end. Just going into to the agenda. So we plan actually to talk more or less around 40 minutes. And then we usually have like 10-15 minutes for questions or more ad hoc subjects or issues that you guys want to talk about. Please, just as mentioned, post questions along the way, but just know we'll factor that in by the end of the hour, so we have time for that. So looking at the agenda, we're going to do the usual fairly quick introductions. First about who is Claus, and then also just an introduction about CXFacts, kind of as a company and offering. Very, very briefly about me. It's not about me today, actually. So we'll go over that pretty quickly. And then going into the status of bank KYC, both seen from the CXFacts point of view, but also kind of the data we see in Avallone. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about future looking. So what do we see out there? What are the trends we're seeing? And then we also have some recommendations. Actually, it says recommendations to corporate treasurers, but we actually also have a few recommendations for the banks joining in. So that's good stuff. So with that said, Claus, welcome to you. Maybe could you give an introduction about yourself, please?
I'll do that, and thank you for inviting me, Anders. Thank you for popping up, everyone. I'm Claus. I'm one of the three founders of CXFacts, and I'll do this very briefly. I spent 25 years in banking, corporate banking, working with the large corporates, primarily in the transaction banking area. Then in addition to those 25 years, I actually spent more than a decade in financial consulting as well. Working with banks and large corporates, optimizing their treasury processes and their bank relationships. So that's the very, very short version. We can keep going for many hours when we reach my age, but I'll stop here.
That's perfect. And then maybe a few words. A few words about the CXFacts, please.
Yes. I'll actually start with the who. We are, as mentioned, three people who have founded CXFacts, and we are former bankers, all of us, and the reason why we did this is based on our experiences. So what it is we're doing, we have developed a SaaS solution where you could say it's one solution, and there's a user interface for banks, a user interface for corporates, but they can of course use it independently. What we do for banks is give them an option to request feedback on customer experience from all of their customers globally. And on the same side, or the other side of the table, you could say, the corporates, they have now the option to collect data and insights on their bank performances throughout their organization, also globally, on all their banks. So banks can use it for collecting customer feedback. Corporates can use it for collecting performance feedback on their banks internally. And why? Of course, we do this based on our experiences. We are fairly experienced people, all of us. We saw that when working in banks that we experienced scarcity of data on customer experience. They came in very rarely. It was It was high-level data. And we also, on the corporate side, saw that the response rates were quite low and actually declining because the current processes had no value for corporates when providing feedback. So that's the short one. We have made one platform globally for banks and corporates to communicate about customer experience.
Amazing. Thank you, Claus. And then final part of the introduction is myself. Yeah, so my name is Anders. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Avallone, which is enterprise KYC, KYB, so KYC between enterprises such as banks and corporates, but other kinds of enterprises. I have, as Claus and his colleagues, a long dark background in banking. 17 years in Nordea and 4 years in Danske, and predominantly also corporate banking. So I think I know a lot of the same clients as Claus do. And then the last 7 years, as I usually refer to it, in the really dark side of banking, so heading up risk and compliance in Nordea and then compliance in Danske. So this obviously means I've seen my share of money laundering, but I think also more importantly, my share of frustrations with KYC. And KYC is exactly the subject today, and where CXFacts and Avallone ties together, because you guys have been asking a lot of good questions around KYC and satisfaction around this, and we try to solve it. But we'll get started on that. Perfect, Claus. Thanks for the introductions. So I think let's move into to the kind of the first topic of the day, which is around the data gathering you guys have been doing, Claus, and the whole approach to it. So I guess the key first question is, when we start to look at the findings, is, you know, what is the methodology? How do you get the data? These kind of things as a kind of as a starting point.
Yeah. What we actually did was we wanted to do this specific study on KYC because we know it takes up a lot of time, resources, and attention for corporates primarily, but naturally also on the banks. So what we did, we reached out to 100 plus large corporates and asked them, which banks do you use? And are you willing to provide some data on the KYC services on your banks? And that ended up actually in receiving close to 2,500 data points on KYC on the Nordic banks, or the banks present in the Nordics with infrastructure capabilities. And when I say 2,500 data points, that's scores on questions, how customers perceive the bank's performance. In addition to that, we ask for each question also the importance for customers. So that's another 2,500 data points. And then we compiled this in the report that you will receive after today. Just a quick recap on the companies. There are companies from below €1 billion revenue up till close to 300 billion euro revenue. So it's a wide variety, but the bulk of it is what banks perceive as tier 1 customers. They represent, or they have headquarters in 10 different countries, but they have all scored the Nordic banks, so the banks in the Nordics that they use. In addition to this, we actually also were asked by some of the corporates that provided data to include some of their other banks outside of the Nordics region, because they want to see the data, in comparison, and see if there are some stuff to discover in that respect. So we might, during the session today, also bring some observations in that area.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the methodology, basically. And if we then go into what you see here now is the Nordic total results and results per country, and that's based on all the questions that we asked. And you can say that in general, you will have lower scores on the bank's capabilities than what the importance is perceived to be for the corporates. We consider that to be, a lack in performance according to expectation. So basically, and that's normal what you see in other studies as well, that there is a gap between the score and the importance, and that is to a large extent always negative. What we can say though is that when we look at our data across the board, we collect data from many companies, or receive data from many companies, and in many different product areas, being cash management, corporate banking, foreign exchange, etc. And what we can see is actually that the largest gaps between scores of performance and importance for customers, that is KYC. So this is really one of the areas, if not the area, where banks actually can improve the most and have the highest impact on the customer perception. So I think that's quite remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. And Claus, it leads me, so I'm just thinking, now we're looking at the Nordics, and you mentioned before, hey, we're also maybe going to touch a little bit upon outside the Nordics, right? So one could have a few theories before even looking at the results, right? Which is, okay, the Nordics is one of the most digitized regions in the world, right? So one should assume, hey, the banks here should perform fairly well. On the other hand, a part of the customer base is also very digitized, and thereby also have very high expectations, right? So I think it's an important finding you mentioned here that, hey, there's a discrepancy between expectation and actually delivery. But I also think that, well, this is smart, or at least I don't have the numbers you have, right? But when we talk to customers outside of the Nordics, I mean, the level of frustration with international banks is just massive. And we can always get back to good old stories, war stories of what we've seen, right? But what's your reflection around Nordics versus international?
I would say that you're spot on. What we can see is actually that, especially if you talk about scores or bank ratings from corporates within the Nordics and their banks outside, you can clearly see a trend that the Nordic banks score significantly higher. So it looks as though, at least looking from the Nordics out, that the longer the bank gets from the company headquarters, the lower the score. But it doesn't reflect the other way in. That underlines what you can say, that the Nordics are doing quite well, because we see that scores from corporates outside of the Nordics on the Nordic banks actually more or less match the Nordic companies' levels. But what we can say also, when we dive into the individual bank and look at customer scores, the better the score on performance, the less important it is for the customers. Meaning that if it's a nuisance in some way, the importance increases, right? So I think that's a really important conclusion, at least as we see it, especially for the bank side, because it seems that, and now I'm also making assumptions, but we talk to a lot of banks as well, of course, and many see KYC as a regulatory base, a cost base, rather than a competitive area, you could say, towards customers. And I think that, with that conclusion that, if you do well, you could say the nuisance or the expectations from corporates actually diminishes. So from our side, exactly. I see this as a huge area actually to compete, to gain momentum, to show that you focus on the customer journey more than just looking at it as a regulatory issue that you need to fulfill, and then do it at the lowest cost level possible.
Yeah, and I think that could point to another part, right? That for banks, this is front, right, and center. This is super important. And I'm not saying bankers love KYC. Well, I know they don't. But I think it's also just, putting yourself in the customer and the corporate treasurer's shoes. I mean, they have zero feelings around this. This just needs to get over with, right? For them to get to the real goal, which is running their business and, having bank accounts, having access to funding, deposits, all of that good stuff.
Yes.
But the KYC just stands in its way, right?
Yeah.
So if we could make it go away, they will be even more happier. That being said, I think over the 4 years we've been going at it with Avallone, but also going back in time in my banking period, I think you've seen an enormous increase in understanding why it's important. So I think very few people will say, no, we should just not do KYC. Everyone understands. So it's not about doing it or not. It's about, hey, you need to do it in a proper way. You need to, so regulatory requirement is no excuse for having a bad process. Yeah.
Very well put. And it's also, when we look at the data or the insights, whatever you want to call it, it's mind-blowing for us in CXFacts that the only thing you could say, it's not even a product area, but the only thing that scores higher in importance than KYC corporates is customer support. So you can say all the product areas, the capabilities on products and services, the relationship management part, that has a lower importance with customers than KYC. So this is really this is the big
pretty mind blowing, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think for sure we have enough data to make that conclusion without a doubt. And again, we're not we built this in a way where customers, of course, provide the data themselves, but also to increase validity, we can the customer can have as many people within their organization responding as they wish. So we really see a valid data foundation. Going into these, we just picked the 5 questions that we posed to the corporates. Looking at some of the more important stuff, that is the 2 lowest 2 questions at the bottom. The processes should be well coordinated across the bank's organization. You can see the total score across the Nordic banks, 3.3 out of 5. Maybe I should have said that in the beginning. We always score 1 to 5, where 5 is the best, both on score and importance. So there's a gap on more than 1. So that, in general, they expect a lot more than what the banks are doing. The flip side of that is, of course, that we also hear from corporates that, I remember specifically one story that one bank had centralized and aligned and done everything to make it really swift and neat. But then it lacked flexibility, and it just turned the other way around. So it is a difficult area for banks as well, for sure. But that's also why we think, of course, customer feedback and often is important. The other one is the bottom one: efficiency and speed of banks' KYC processes. And what we hear when we dive into discussions with corporates is that is basically based on timelines. So the deadlines that are set by banks are, in many cases, according to customers, a bit tight and lack understanding of corporate processes. Again, we are delivering data, so we're just a gateway.
Yeah, exactly. It's not you saying it, it's the customers, right? But I think this thing with the process and deadlines, right? I think also it's interesting what we kind of see and also hear from many of the banks. I think by now the wait time from sending out a request to getting a response for a corporate client, and that's across the board, so also including tier 2, tier 3 corporates, is starting to get above 150 days. And that's a long time, right? So I think there are corporate treasurers sitting out there saying, guys, we need more time to coordinate internally. But then there are also corporates that are flat out ignoring these requests and thereby not prioritizing, right?
Yes.
And I think this leads the banks to do a shorter timeline, a stricter follow-up, because they just know that in order to get to the target, they have to push their customers, right?
And I fully agree. Yeah. I normally say that, you know, things take the time that you have. So for sure that's the case, and we can also see that you know, there's a difference between tier 1, 2, and 3 in this respect, and tier 3 doesn't see this as it's not an issue for them, but tier 1 and 2, then it's, you know, with complexity it becomes more and more severe for companies, of course, and also for banks, and it's fully understandable. And I truly, you know, acknowledge what you're saying, that, you know, tight deadlines is possibly the way to go, also for ensuring that, you know, there's a process in place when companies don't deliver.
Yeah, exactly. But I think still, I think the sad thing is that a lot of the frustrations that build up, you could say on both sides, is mainly caused by poor processes.
Yeah.
You know, and most likely also on both sides, right? And then we end up in an argument because of poor processes, right? Which is a bit of a shame, right? Yeah.
That is true.
Any other observations, Claus, on the data set we're looking at?
Well, you could say the overall, I mean, now you can see the banks here, and again, we are delivering the results. If you look at the Nordics, Danske Bank is obviously perceived as you know, the more efficient bank in KYC processes. Having said that, you can also see there are still gaps everywhere, at least on all these issues that we have raised here. And I should also say that much of these questions that we ask on KYC is actually developed with corporates on attending here as well. So thank you. So we think that these are relevant questions to look into on, of course, when it's relevant on the customer side, then it's also relevant to the banks. So, but the general in KYC in general, there are negative gaps, meaning they expect more. The scores are lower than the importance.
Understood.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. On this one, Claus, I guess this is kind of the highlights on all of it, right?
It is, and again, just to highlight one or two. I mean, I think it's really mind-blowing that the negative gaps that we see across the board is the highest on KYC. So for corporates, you know, communicate clearly, often in a uniform way to banks what you expect. Banks see this as a way to really understand customers better and you know, get closer to their expectations, because there's a correlation between the scoring on KYC and both on innovation. So are you seen as an innovative bank, but also on the willingness to recommend. I'll get a little bit into that later, but there's actually you know, a correlation between how well you're doing on KYC to the willingness to recommend, and that's also, I think, crucial, of course. Not that that is important for corporates. I mean, it's just a statement. But also, I can mention one story also, or an incident that corporates really look into, as it's not directly KYC, but it's KYC related, and that's the speed with which banks can provide accounts to corporates. and especially for project organizations where you might need to go into new markets, new countries where you don't have any, corporates existing or KYC documentation existing. You probably all know the worst cases where corporates can wait up to 8, 9, 10 months for a new bank account, and many times, that's kind of the basis for getting the business going. So we've had some really large corporates, some of the largest in the Nordics, stating that this is actually the most important key for us. How is the bank able to help us with a quick onboarding and KYC process in order to get that bank account? And that's, of course, border case incident when you go into a new market, etc. But it's part of the process and a part of how the customer perceives the KYC of the bank.
Yeah, and this is getting back to KYC is just a process you have to go through in order to actually achieve the real goal, right? Which is access to banking services. And very apropos, we have a funny question in the chat, which is like, what's the worst? Let me just say, what is the worst story you've heard about a KYC request from a bank? And maybe Claus, I can start, and then you can have a go, because it's apropos opening a bank account. So I think I spoke to one corporate a year ago at least, but that was opening bank account in Greece. So there we're talking above 12 months to get the bank account open. I'm not going to mention the name of the bank, but the funny thing was that the treasurer then told me, we thought it was bad to get the account opened. It was even worse to close it, because there you had to show up in person, right? Then again, Greece could be worse places. So I think you always hear these war stories when you talk to treasurers. It's kind of the first thing they want to tell you, get it off their chest kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not the case in the Nordic marketplace at all. We have, fairly efficient processing, but it's again, if it's part of the bank that you're present in one or more of these countries where it's difficult or the attention is low or whatever it is, I think the key issue is of course to align expectations, and again then communicate often and ask your customer for feedback, so you can kind of evaluate where can we step in to improve the relationship. And on the same side, on the same issue from the corporate side, provide feedback to your banks, whether they ask for it or not. I think this, could say collaboration, more than one way, is much more giving to both parties. It will provide more business for the bank, and it will be much easier to operate the bank's products and services over time for the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course you can almost be dwarfed by the size of the problem, right? Because if you look at and I also recognize names here that have been used to working with thousands and thousands of accounts for one corporate, right? When you start to work with high volumes, just thinking about the amount of data sets that has to flow between the corporate and the bank, also in terms of intended use of the account, opening and closing accounts on that sort of level. So I think there's so much to solve on the process and data part, obviously. But until we do that, we're kind of stuck in these very manual processes where you get a phone call, you get an email, right? And you have to have a team or someone has to handle that, right? So the frustration is understandable.
It is, but luckily that provides a space in the market for you and I. So that's
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Any other highlights from this one, Claus, or do we?
I mean, they are more or less obvious. I mean, if a company perceives a bank as a trusted partner, they score them higher. But is that because one or the other? I don't know. But yeah, no, I think that's the main the main conclusions. Overall, as mentioned, you will get the report after the seminar or the webinar, and then you will see the details on each question and per country, etc. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. So we're going over the results fairly brief, obviously, but the full report will be shared with everyone, right? So you can dive into the numbers.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect, Claus.
But I also,
Yeah, sorry, please.
I think I also just brought a little bit more just to show the kind of or examples of a few data points that we also have. You can say here, or see here on the left, that we also have, speed of service when opening and closing accounts. These are, again, just examples. These are bank scores for Denmark. You can see it's, there are varied opinions on different areas. So it's not one bank dominating, but these are all issues that we measure and have data from a lot of companies on their banking partners. And again, also, of course, on all these more traditional banking areas that follow the bank organizations, such as cash, foreign exchange, working capital, trade finance, etc. So yeah, get in touch if you are interested in looking at your bank data.
Yeah, exactly, and also it'll be super interesting also to see the comparisons across Europe as those numbers start to rack up. I know you have a couple of initiatives in the pipeline, also on additional questions and stuff like that.
Yes, yes. You could say, I mean, getting back to why we are establishing CXFacts and working, I would say, really hard on that is that over time we want to become kind of the first true global bank benchmark database, both for banks and corporates. So that's the wet dream, so to speak.
Yep. That's the ambition. Fantastic. Thank you, Claus. Then we're kind of changing gear now because I think, and you also have it in the results, Claus. So what's the difference between the banks actually? I mean, why does it have to be so difficult, right? Why can't I just send one set of answers to one bank and I can send the same answers to the other bank? And this the data you're looking at now is some of the data that we collect in Avallone, not as a primary purpose, but as a byproduct of what we do. And also here we've honed in on the Nordic banks, but maybe just a few words on how we get the requirement data here. So our customers use the platform to respond to KYC requests coming from all kinds of counterparties, but especially banks, obviously. And in that process, we see the questionnaires and digitize the questionnaires. And this means that we can categorize these questionnaires and the questions into these various categories you see here, bank by bank and thereby region by region. And I think what we're looking at here is a good example of why corporate treasurers are frustrated, right? And it's straight to your point, Claus, around, hey, maybe the processes are not super optimal, right? And we can quickly find excuses for the bank's point of view because but we operate in different regulatory environments, so we have to cater the questions to that. However, I think that's to some degree correct, but also to some degree a bad excuse. So just very quickly deriving the data we have here, you can actually see that there are huge differences across the Nordics, and here we have anonymized the banks. But you see some banks asking 75 questions, you see other banks asking more than 100 questions, and you see big differences in the categorizations of the questions. What this means for the corporate treasury is that it is very, very hard to reuse data. And when you expand this across Europe and actually also globally, the differences become even bigger, right? So I think the sad news is that standardization is not there. And the even sadder news is that we don't see standardization coming anytime soon. The banks actually are moving more and more away from each other. And we've seen initiatives where they try to collaborate. The latest one was Inviden across the Nordic banks, where they had this one KYC utility which was shut down. So you see even mature markets actually not being able to collaborate on the standards. And going a little bit further, this we're looking at the same data, just split on other in other splits, but you can see here just the bank with the most questions and the average. So part of these differences are quite obvious. I think one interesting sub data point that we also see is that, and again coming back to your point, Claus, about internal processes, that even within the same bank, across countries, there can be huge differences.
Yes.
So we've seen one bank in one country having a completely different set of setup, as you see here, compared to the same bank in another country. One bank in one country not requiring signing, same bank in another country requiring signing on all documents. And it can seem like whatever. Why does that matter? Well, it matters for the corporate treasurer who has to, print passport copies and get signature on it and re-upload and send it, right? So I think in conclusions, what we've been looking at here is one of the root causes for the results that you're showing, Claus, right? For the level of frustration, and this is just in Nordics, right?
I fully agree, and what we also hear when we talk with corporates around this is that it's to a large degree actually a matter of aligning expectations. So being clear from the beginning, right? That the processes are described and corporates know what to expect. That's also part of it, because I think there are difficulties for banks because of regulatory issues. Some countries require a lot more than others, and that's just how it is. And that'll probably be that way for many years to come. But I think it's about aligning expectations.
But then, yeah, exactly. But then, who do you think is going to push the standardization agenda? Because at least all the corporates are talking about standardization, and you should think for the banks it would be interesting. But will it be the banks or the corporates?
That's a very, very good question, and I think as it is now, I mean we've seen banks try, right? Also across banks, like you mentioned, but we also see now larger international banks trying to do something and trying to get other banks on board. But I actually think that it needs to come from the large corporates. Again, that's just my personal opinion, but I think history has shown, and I know history changes very quickly these days, especially technology-wise. But I think it will take a lot of pressure for the very large corporates to push the standardization through. I don't think, and I might be wrong, I don't think it'll come from banks, to be honest, at least not in the foreseeable future.
No, exactly, and I think I tend to agree. So of course, usually the customer is always right, and the customer has enormous power, right, and that goes especially for very large customers. So I think, to your point, I think it will come from the very large corporates. And what we see in some of our customers in Avallone is that the very large corporates start to actually create their own KYC package. And they say, hey, this is the package. Welcome to us as a banking partner, right?
Yeah.
This is the package we're going to share with you. Because these corporates are fairly mature, they also understand the need for sharing. They understand the underlying driver for KYC. They understand the underlying driver for transparency, and they want to be transparent. So often they're actually willing to share more than the bank is asking. But then this means that they're pushing fairly large packages to the bank and say, here you go. But you better think twice before you come back with another question,
yes.
right? And I think that part could be a strong driver of actually creating some sort of foundational level of standardization. And then I think maybe another, yeah, sorry, Claus.
No, just move ahead, because I'm trying to kind of, or I'll just change a little bit direction, but please go on.
Okay, cool. So quickly, I think another driver for the standardization, I think, is data. Data coming from the sorts of you guys at CXFacts, data coming from Avallone, because one bank only understands what they ask. And sometimes they don't even understand what their same bank in the other country is asking, right? But they mainly understand what they ask. But if you could start to put out, data like we're seeing here, and saying, hey, listen, this is the average, and the average is not necessarily right, but at least this is kind of like where the average is, and then let's have a discussion on why there's some way below average and why there's some way above average. So maybe just the transparency of the data could start to drive, and also equip the corporate treasurer with saying, hey, this is a great question you're asking me, dear bank, but you're the only one in the region asking me this question or having this requirement. So why is it that you as the only one asked me to get a notary public signature on all my passports? So I think that can kind of start with removing the extremes, right?
So it turns out we were actually on the same line anyway, because
okay.
what I was thinking was transparency. I think transparency, is, I mean, it's here to stay, of course. Transparency is becoming the new normal everywhere. And that's also, one of the main reasons that we built CXFacts, because we want to increase that transparency between bank and corporate, so they can mutually benefit from that transparency. And I think, when you get to a point where you can, as a bank, request feedback from all your large corporates or your corporate clients within an industry or whatever it is that you're focusing on, and really get into the details. And now you mentioned averages and top and bottom or below and above. I would also say, and we see that with the banks using our platform, that they use our or the data that they request from corporates, or that they receive from corporates automatically, is used on a one-to-one basis. So actually, really specific data on issues are used for specific bank meetings to discuss, really nitty-gritty stuff where the bank can improve, and then, again, the corporate can benefit based on that. And again, when the corporate customer benefits, the bank benefits, right? So I think transparency is a big thing going towards a standardization. But I think you need to, of course, look at, bulks of data, but also, again, focus on the really large corporates that typically drive development in banks as well.
Yeah, spot on. And yeah, we should move ahead now for the last section, but I think it makes me think. So as a software provider, getting feedback is actually pretty easy, because you can ask the user in app, in the context, hey, what do you think about what you're experiencing now? And they can give you feedback, right? That's much more difficult for a bank, because the customer user experience is so many places, and it's in a manual process, it's in a meeting, it's in a document signing. And I guess this is what you guys are about to build, right, or have built, right? So how can you actually get this NPS score, this immediate feedback across this enormous life cycle between a corporate client and a bank, right?
And that's why we're here. What we have built is exactly that. You can use the platform. It's a SaaS tool, so it's geared to have one-on-one, or 1 to 1,000 or 50,000 in a go. We have pre-populated questionnaires that they can pick and choose from. Questions in management, questions in KYC, questions in whatever, and then you pick and choose what you want to include. You can add your own if you wish, and you can send it out to all the customers in one go if you wish. And of course, follow it real time when it comes in. And what is really important, and also why we can provide much higher response rates than normal one-way software, is that we actually provide the opportunity for the corporate customer to log onto our platform and keep the data. They can of course respond as normal survey tools or normal questionnaires, but they have the option to go in and create their profile and save the data, so they can actually also analyze within their own organization. Imagine a group treasurer sitting, maybe 5 people. They have dialogue with the banks, etc., but they never have had the platform, the system, the time or processes to collect information from the maybe 50 people in their organization that are working with the bank solutions and services. Now we provide that to them. So you can really get into the detail now and ask the right people for the stuff that they dedicated work with. So that's the whole idea behind this, that we want to give the banks more actionable, specific data from known customers, and at the same time provide the corporate customers with a valuable data set that they also can learn and extract really good insights from, in order to strengthen this business relationship. Because typically in large corporates, you have 30, 40, 50 people on the corporate side working with banks, the same amount of people in a bank working with that corporate in different areas. It's a complex relationship. But we can kind of streamline all the data and sort and give a fantastic overview in our own opinion. Luckily, also in our customers' opinions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and that's the whole reason why we built the solution.
Fantastic. So thanks, Claus. So time is ticking, and we have 10 minutes left before we reach the top of the hour, just to round up. So I think trends and the future. So maybe Claus, you can start on this question. So if you were a corporate treasurer and you're unhappy with your bank's current process, I mean, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I would kind of document it in a way, and again, do that via collecting feedback from the people actually working with the specific items that you want to highlight. Because there's a saying that data never lies, right? They can lie, of course, but it's the best that you have. So build a foundation for the right discussions, and then do it on an ongoing basis. Give your bank some feedback every 3 months, and we see also that's the case for most of our corporate users. They do that either every 3 months, every 6 months, but at least with the frequency, so they can also see, okay, does the situation change, or do we still have the same issues? And then communicate based on those data. What are your expectations? I think that's the key point, because I've seen so many and also participate in these meetings, both from the bank side or corporate treasury side, that you meet every 3 or 6 months, have a nice lunch, and agree that everything is fine. But now you have the option to actually bring specific actionable data to every meeting with a minimum of resources used. So I think collect data, document, try and align expectations. That's the key.
Yeah, understood. And of course, both you and I, Claus, we're in the business of selling software. So I think on that extension, I would say from the process point of view, regardless whether you procure a software system like CXFacts, and in our case like Avallone, for us the recommendation would be get your data in order. Right, so there's a lot you can do. Now we're just talking about when you reply to the request. There's a lot you can do without procuring software, and I maybe shoot myself in the foot, right? But for us, it's like, hey, you can start to set up robust processes around collecting internal collection of your documents and your data points. You can start to set up, okay, how do I want to share this in a secure way? You can start to create a package. And then depending on size and the nature of your business and the number of requests, that's where you need to start to consider to digitize that process, right? But I think there's definitely, so we run into customers where we're actually pretty impressed. Wow, they really have a strong process, and that actually makes it easy to digitize. But the vast majority of our customers, when we meet them the first time around, is no, they don't have a strong process because they just don't like KYC, right? To be very blunt, they hate it, right?
Yes.
So this is the last thing you want to spend time on, and then you kind of get caught up doing the same over and over again, and you get equally annoyed every time, but you don't have the energy or just the energy or joy to actually, hey, this is really interesting. Let me try and fix the KYC process. It doesn't exist, right?
That's true. But I think also, talking about software, and yes, we are in the business of selling software, but I think there's a difference between, in our case, there's a lot of survey tools out there. They're all one-sided, right? They focus on creating value for the sell side that wants to know what the buyer side thinks. I think the collaboration platform idea is also a must going forward. So if you have a solution where, and yes, you need to put a little bit of energy into it, but a collaboration platform where both sides actually can see the benefits. I think that's going to be the winning formula.
And Claus, with a few minutes left, if we should turn the question around, and maybe the answer is the same, I'm not sure, but if we should give the banks an advice here, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid to repeat myself, but ask your customers for feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
Do it often and ask as many customers as you can possibly manage, and then look into the insights that are actually there, because you can sort on customer segments, on industries, on geography, on everything in the insights that you get from those that feedback from the customers. And you mentioned before that customers are always right. I tend to agree most of the time. At least banks act as such, and I think they should. But I think, again, communication, aligning expectations, discussing openly, and that's also one of the reasons that we have really pinpointed. We have, I think, many hundreds questions included in our platform to pick and choose from, developed by banks and corporates together. So I think, if not through our platform, get the data some other way, discuss it with the clients, and then be open and transparent again. Because
exactly.
nobody wins by hiding. So have an open and honest dialogue, and as we would recommend, based on data and insights.
Yeah, spot on. Because, and also one thing is that if you're dissatisfied with a product or a process, but it's even worse to be dissatisfied and then you don't feel that the bank is doing anything about it, right?
Yeah, and the flip side on that for the banks is, of course, I mean, I've had one that asked me, Claus, what happens if I get information that I don't like? And my response was, of course, that if you're sitting in one side of your house and the other side is on the fire, you can't see it, wouldn't you want to know?
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean,
but that's a dangerous strategy. It's the same like when you turn on the NPS score on a platform, you're gonna get ones and twos, and they pull down dramatically on an NPS score. But it's the learning of it, right? It's figuring out, okay, what the hell happened here? How can we make it better? So it's a huge improvement opportunity. But that's a mindset, of course, you have to have.
It is.
And then I would say on the banking side, at least on the process side, as I mentioned before, regulatory requirements is no excuse for having a bad process. And yes, the banks in the Nordics are probably better than many other regions, but they still have a long way to go. And I can say that without blinking, because I've been part of that. I've been part of running bad processes. I understand it takes time to mature, but there's an enormous way to go in terms of digitizing and even just strengthening processes and thereby the customer experience in that, right?
Yeah, and our data support that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a long way to go. the IT, the tech stack in a bank is enormously complex with very, very many also legacy systems that you have to deal with, right? So it's going to be a process, but you can do a lot before actually just even looking at the tech stack.
Exactly.
Okay, we are approaching the end of the hour. Klaus, maybe the final question, which it's come up a little bit in the Q&A, phrased a little bit differently, is more or less, the future of client to bank feedback. But I would actually like to just turn that a little bit and then just ask you, what's coming from you guys on the KYC? I mean, what's your plans in terms of questions on the KYC?
Well, what we're doing, I mean, again, as you can see, we have much data already. We're continuously growing our our database with data coming from corporates on their banks. But what we are doing, or have been doing until now, is collaborating with both banks and corporates for executing these questionnaires or finding the right questions to include. We will now also, work with other industry experts such as Avallone, of course. But we will actually do a KYC as a specific product area in our solution, so banks can see, okay, isolated on KYC, how do we perform towards customers per one, but also compared to our colleagues in the business. So we will work hard on creating that sort of data and insights as we do in all the other product areas within banks. And we see that the data is growing steadily and coming in and covering more and more banks, more and more countries. So we will keep building up data and insights for banks to get a hold of if they wish.
Fantastic. Thank you, Klaus. So I think this concludes 1 or 2 minutes before the top of the hour. So Klaus, thank you so much for joining and giving your insights and sharing the results.
Thank you.
As you mentioned, we're going to share the entire report with participants, and people watching it afterwards on recording can also just reach out and get the report. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope it's been good. If not, or if it has been, just please send us feedback. Apropos you guys, Klaus, on the CXFacts side, just send us feedback so we can improve. And thank you again for joining, Klaus. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.